Hello and welcome to our program today. Today we're looking at a story which is very disturbing in many ways because the story tells us that God kills someone for reaching out and trying to stop the ark from falling. This story is not the picture of what we oftentimes think of as a loving God. I hope you'll stick with us today and that something said in this program will create a change in the way in which you look at God and the way in which you see God acting in your lives.
Lead us from death to life, from falsehood to truth, from despair to hope, from fear to trust. Lead us from hate to love, from war to peace. Let peace fill our hearts, let peace fill our world, let peace fill our universe. Still all the angry cries, still all the angry guns, still more your people die, earth's sons and daughters. Let justice roll, let mercy pour down. Come and teach us your way of compassion. Lead us from death to life, from falsehood to truth, from despair to hope, from fear to trust. Lead us from hate to love, from war to peace. Let peace fill our hearts, let peace fill our world, let peace fill our universe. So many lonely hearts, so many broken lives, longing for love to break into their anguish. Come teach us love, come teach us peace. Come and teach us your way of compassion. Lead us from death to life, from falsehood to truth, from despair to hope, from fear to trust. Lead us from hate to love, from war to peace. Let peace fill our hearts, let peace fill our world, let peace fill our universe. Let justice have a role, let mercy fill the earth. Let us begin to grow into your people. We can be love, we can bring peace, we can still be a way of compassion. Lead us from death to life, from falsehood to truth, from despair to hope, from fear to trust. Lead us from hate to love, from war to peace. Let peace fill our hearts, let peace fill our world, let peace fill our universe.
Our first reading today is from 2 Samuel chapter 6 verses 1 through 19. David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. David and all the people with him set out and went from Baal Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, who is enthroned on the cherubim. They carried the ark of God on a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on a hill. Uzziah and Ohio, the sons of Abinadab, were driving the new cart when the ark of God and Ehud went in front of the ark. David and all the house of Israel were dancing before the Lord with all their might, with songs and lyres and harps and tambourines and castanets and cymbals. When they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzziah reached out his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen shook it. The anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzziah, and God struck him there because he reached out his hand to the ark, and he died there beside the ark of God. David was angry because the Lord had burst forth with an outburst upon Uzziah. So the place is called Perez Uzziah to this day. David was afraid the Lord that day. He said, "How can the ark of God, of the Lord, come into my care?" So David was unwilling to take the ark of the Lord into his care in the city of David. Instead, David took it to the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite. The ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite, 3 months. And the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his household. It was told King David, "The Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him, because of the ark of God." So David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. And when those who bore the ark of the Lord had gone 6 paces, he sacrificed an ox and a fatling. David danced before the Lord with all his might. David was girded with a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with sound of trumpet, as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David. Michal, daughter of Saul, looked out of the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. They brought in the ark of the Lord and set it in its place, inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and offerings of well-being before the Lord. When David had finished offering the burnt offerings and the offerings of well-being, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts, and distributed food among all the people, the whole multitude of Israel, both men and women, to each a cake of bread, a portion of meat, and a cake of raisin. Then all the people went back to their homes. reading from the theological works of Emanuel Swedenborg, from his book Doctrine of Life, number 42. People who have only a vague concept of the inner self and the outer self believe that it is the inner self that thinks and intends, and the outer that speaks and acts as a result. Since thinking and intending are internal activities, and speaking and acting are external, it should be borne in mind, though, that when we think intelligently and intend wisely, we are thinking and intending from a spiritual inner nature. But when we do not think intelligently and intend wisely, we are thinking and intending from an earthly inner nature. This means that when our thoughts are about the Lord and about matters that involve the Lord are good, and when our thoughts about our neighbor and about matters that involve our neighbor are good, and when our intentions toward them are good, we are thinking and intending from our spiritual inner nature. This is because thinking is based on a belief in what is true and a love for what is good, and is therefore coming from heaven. However, when our thoughts about them are evil, and our intentions toward them are evil, and when our thinking and intending from our earthly inner evil, and our intentions toward them are evil, then we are thinking and intending from our earthly inner nature, because our thinking is based on a belief in what is false, and a love for what is evil. So our thinking is coming from hell. In short, to the extent that we are focused on loving the Lord and loving our neighbor, our inner nature is spiritual. We are thinking and intending from that nature, and are also speaking and acting from it as well. To the extent that we are focused on loving ourselves and loving the world, though, our inner nature is earthly. We are thinking and intending from that nature, and are speaking and acting from it as well.
Built this city in ages long ago, and busy in its busy streets they hurried to and fro. The children played around them and sang the songs of yore, till one by one they fell asleep to work and play no more. Yet still the city standeth, a hive of toiling men, and mother's love makes happy home for children now and then. O God of ages, help us such citizens to be, that children's children here may sing the songs of liberty. Let all the people praise thee, give all thy saving health. For vain the labourer's strong right arm, and vain the merchant's wealth. Send forth the light to banish the shadows and the shame, till all the civic virtue shine around the city's name. A commonwealth of brothers, united, great and small, upon a banner blazoned be a charter each for all. Nor let us cease from battle, no weary sheath the sword, until this city is become a city of the Lord.
This story does not talk about all of the rules about who's allowed to touch the ark and who is not allowed to touch the ark. What is the role of the people who stand by the ark, and There's a whole code of rules and policies about how you transport the ark and about who's allowed to touch it. Uzziah, when he reached out to touch it, one could say he was reaching out to touch it because the oxen stumbled a little bit and he had a concern of it falling. But there's an element where Uzziah is actually not listening to what God has asked to have happen. It's easy for us to use a superficial understanding of the situation. One could also look at the text and say that Uzziah was almost intentionally violating his station in order to be the one who got to reach out to save the ark. There's an element here that is actually really important in our lives. A lot of us, I'm assuming every one of us, have a notion of what's right and wrong, of what's good and what is evil. One of the things that this tradition teaches, and Swedenborg writes about, is a reality that we oftentimes don't want to acknowledge. And that reality is simply that what we love, we want to call good. We want to call right. We want to call important. When we use our own desire to label what is good, to label what is right, we can mislabel and misrepresent things all of the time. Throughout history, a whole lot of people have said things were good and said things were loving that were not. Love has been used to justify slavery. Love has been used to justify the oppression of women. Love has been used to justify conquering other people. We can use love all the time. We can use biblical values to espouse how we're right and they're wrong all the time. Because it doesn't take long for the human brain, when we come up and value certain things, for us to create a moral code, a value code that puts us above other people, that makes it so we become the arbiters of what's right and wrong. And when we do that, we remove God from the throne of God. We remove God from being in control, and we assume that control. We remove ourselves from God's providence at that point. All the time we can talk about my political party is the right political party and their political party is the wrong political party. And we make massive claims about how this one person or that one person, these people are going to be the people to usher in what is right and true and good, and more often than not, they will not and they do not, but we want to be right. In a concept of true humility, we as disciples can use that humility to understand that our way isn't right. The Lord's way is right. What is the Lord's way? Well, we can look at the Ten Commandments and we can look at the question of whether or not we're empowering other people. We can look at the question of whether or not the Lord is the one benefiting from our actions versus ourselves. But it's very easy for us to justify, to be Robin Hoods, to say, well, it's okay to steal from the rich if I'm giving it to the poor. Well, here's a pretty good rule about most things. If you do something that you're not willing to tell somebody else, it's wrong. And you know it's wrong. But oftentimes we justify it. When God gives us gifts, and we take those gifts over from God, and we start praising ourselves and giving ourselves credit that we think we are the ones who can stop the ark from falling. We are the ones who can stop the evil from happening. When we lose sight of the fact that it is God either working through us or working through our community or working through all things, when we fail to have that realization, we misstep. God is always the one leading. The question is, are we looking to God? Are we following God's rules? This is actually one of the interesting things in the story. David was so worried because he saw what happened that he refused to finish bringing the ark to Jerusalem. He was scared that if he didn't do what God said, that God was going to kill him. He was willing to, at that moment, sacrifice the faith that brought him the kingship because he wanted to maintain his power. Now, the ark stayed for 3 months. Stayed for 3 months, which Swedenborg says 3 is a number of completion. David went through a process of realizing that the blessing of the Lord was always going to be with the person who was willing to live a holy life and a good life, a life that was guided by asking the questions of what is it that God calls us to be? God calls us to not take credit. God calls us to walk humbly. God calls us to faithfully work within our towns, within our communities, within our churches. God calls us not just to take control of the things that we're given and do what we want, but to do what God is calling us to do, to carry the message, to carry the word, the truth from one spot to another spot, from the internal self to the external self, from our churches to our community. We are called not to ask what is going to make ourselves safe and happy, but what can we do to help our neighbors, to transform our neighbors? What can we do to truly reach out in love and care despite what might happen? Here's the problem. If we react with fear, if we cease the journey of the ark from our inner self to our outer self, we are doing that, and that is akin to reaching out and touching the ark. We are losing a piece of ourselves when we care about our own welfare. And I don't mean our own personal safety, I mean our own pleasures. When we care about making ourselves the center of our faith, when we think about ourselves as being the reason that the church exists. All of these commandments that we have are about leaving ourselves and reaching out. Are we loving those who are around us by asking them what they need? Are we being the Samaritan? Are we bringing the love and truth of God to the people around us? I hope this week, when you have a moment where you might take credit, where you might think to yourself, boy, I really wish this would happen, that you pause for a moment and ask, who's driving that? Is it you? Is it your desires? Are you asking, dear God, will you please make the world what I want it to be? Or are you asking the question, dear God, what can I do to be of service to your creation and to you? That subtle question actually was what was happening with the movement of the ark from Mount Sinai on its journey all the way to the city of David. It's the question that all of the kings asked when they were asked to build a home for the ark in Jerusalem. It is the question that each person asks throughout their entire life. Will I actually let God be more important than myself? Who's leading? Is it God Or is it your outward worldly desires that are wanting prestige, comfort, and money and entertainment? Or is it the desire to truly love, to truly reach out, and to truly help your fellow people? Amen.